He's still figuring it out.
Just trying to get a good shot. He's picking up his pennies off the floor.
You've seen the show before, right? Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be pretty rough.
Don't rush.
Yeah, we'll get to go.
Okay, let's do it.
Alright, Mr. Pinky.
He sounds fine to me.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Endgame with our hosts Nomono and Psych and special guest secret identity guest AtomJaay.
Yay!
And tonight we talk about the end of the world.
Oh, good.
The end of the world as brought on by 3D printing, maybe. We'll see. So we'll talk about 3D printing, which turns out to be a lot more interesting than I initially thought. Like I sort of had my mind blown when you started talking about it, AtomJaay. But before we get into that, let's do a broad sweep of the future, because you're also going to be the community spotlight this week. So can you just give us the broad strokes, like how you think things are going to go down? Like how are we going to do?
Super broad strokes, not central on VR.
Start broad, and then
Where's
if
it
you
all
want, you
going?
can focus in. But I want to hear your big picture.
Big picture, I think we're moving towards a place where lying isn't going to be an option. Technologically speaking, if the smallest little incident happens and there's data about it and everybody knows it, and if it's an instance of any import, then everybody on the planet knows it within 2 seconds. I think we're moving towards an interesting time in our species where lying in secrets kind of gets taken off the table as a tool set in culture.
That's something I've considered before, but it's hard for me to even think about, because that seems like such an extreme cultural change. I can't imagine it actually happening, even though the logic checks out. Like if information and everything becomes really open and we have the technology to do it, but I can't even imagine that future.
We kind of see if you look at the chart of privacy being lost by the individual versus corporations and government, it's kind of an even decline. They track. So if that keeps going, then everything changes, really. Like, it would be an alien civilization compared to what we live in right now.
Actually kind of reverting, because I think privacy is this new construct that didn't really exist in like small towns and stuff before technology. Like, it was a different type of lack of privacy, but people knew what was going on in their neighbors' houses and what was going on in the communities and stuff. So it's kind of interesting that instead of this graph that's like starting from, we used to be extremely private and now we're kind of getting no privacy. We've kind of like, I feel like it's more of a graph or something where we started out with low privacy.
As far as information goes. Like, we exist on a planet where there's tons of resource management and governance going on, and we're moving, through a bunch of cool technologies that are disrupting things into a place where that can all be done, in trustless ways, and it's accumulative. And I see things like Facebook. If you look at Facebook, if we're moving towards this, pseudo telepathic society where at least, within a few seconds, pretty much all you need to know. We see like Facebook, it's kind of like, in that analogy, it's the telepathic playpen of our society, and you see the misbehaving and how people don't know how to use it properly, and they put way too much of themselves out there and make fools of themselves, and it gets backlash and the Barbra Streisand effect and all that stuff. Or figuring out how to be a telepathic society that's got honesty built into the fabric of it all. So that's a big, super wide picture with far implications on any topic you choose, really.
Something Sarah and I were kind of talking about that I think we agree on is, I think one of the worries with all the information that's out there is that when it comes to secrets not being around, I think in fact it's worse now, because people basically choose what sites they want to visit for news and choose to not go to other sites. So I think now information or misinformation is actually worse than ever, not better. There are people who literally, like, and I'm going to use flat earthers as an example, because I don't know if there's any in the room. If they are, I'm sorry. but I mean, they literally isolate themselves to only sites that support the flat Earth theory, and like there is nothing. I don't think there's many theories in the world that are easier to debunk than that the Earth is flat, and yet they convince themselves and isolate themselves.
We've got informational anarchy on the internet right now, right?
Yeah.
And the only way true anarchy actually works and progresses and a species could actually pull it off is if every single person had a deep set ingrained sense of self-responsibility. So at a microcosm in the information anarchy on the internet, you got to just give people, if people don't take personal responsibility for the information that they latch onto, if their bullshit detector isn't up to snuff, then the rest of us can't set aside the beautiful cornucopia a la carte of information that we have. Like,
Okay,
it's
I
too
see what you're
good,
saying.
it's too valuable. It's too valuable to those who can handle
So
it.
you're saying for those that can understand how to use it, there will be no secrets from them, but as a side effect,
People
you
will
will
keep
have
secrets from themselves.
People will
That's
keep
a
secrets from themselves.
psychological issue. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
less of a
and-
societal.
So Sarah says that internet autonomy destroys that. So, which is interesting.
Really.
I feel like that's something we should do a whole show about because I think it would take a long time to unpack the implication of that.
So all of that leads up to aided by this other stuff we're going to talk about, like how this technology we're dealing with can affect communication and visual communication, and kind of cutting through the fog of meaning when it comes to language.
Okay, well, I mean, like, should we actually just move into the subject then? Because you're already sort of getting. I feel like we're going to get to what you just talked about by the end of the show, but we should probably start to form like a foundation.
So basically, everybody kind of knows where 3D printing is right now. It's part of the cultural kind of zeitgeist. It's in there. It's not a fad. It's not going anywhere. You might know somebody who has one or is interested in one or has made use of one through a third party. So it's getting out there as far as adoption.
But does it actually matter? Is it going to change anything? Because all I imagine is I can print like a bric-a-brac or like a little cup holder or something for my pencils on my desk. Like, that's really cool, but that doesn't change my life.
Printing me or printing someone and putting them on your
I'm going to print everyone who comes to the show. I'm going to print them out and put them on my shelf. So I have a little collection of everyone. I can.
It all boils down to things like the size of the machine, build area, how useful you can get one object, boom, right off the printer. I mean, that, affects use cases. Also, there's materials, which they make strides every year in stronger materials, easier materials to work with, and also different kinds of forms and finishes, and some that are even like eco-friendly, sequestered carbon and algae and all kinds of exotic things. Right now, we've got the training wheels. We've got the seed of a distributed additive manufacturing network as far as personal printer operators and garages. And I think if you have like 3 or 4, you qualify as like a bot farm. But a good portion of those people are very anxious to kind of have the mentality that they want to print their way out of the rat race, so to speak. And they put their services out there, and there's hubs, literal 3D hubs, or Make XYZ. There's a bunch of competitors out there, networks, that you can find people in your local area who want to have something printed, and you do it for them. And this is really the seed of a distributed manufacturing network, not just with additive manufacturing, i.e. 3D printing, but also laser cutting and milling. Everything's getting smaller size, and even at the component level, if someone operating one of these printer hubs were to stock up on certain elements or kits, you've got consumer products like lamps and other things. And it basically comes down to servicing local needs that normally in our culture right now, how everything operates, the little plastic knickknackeries or little accessories or adapters or things that you eventually need. Maybe not, a ton yourself, but you'll need one. That contributes to the reason that they're made on the other side of the planet, injection molded usually, and then shipped plane train automobile, tons of resources, packaging in the thousands in case, somebody on the other side of the planet actually needs it.
Just to give me
So,
like the little tie, the little
doing it
plastic
locally.
tie on my Vive controller, right? Just a little bit of plastic.
Exactly. So it's becoming, in my opinion, I'm less excited. Like in the early days, it's like, oh, everybody's gonna have one on their desk, and it would be great if everybody, got into this and had what we called print goggles, where you do it enough and you start looking at consumer items on the shelves at Walmart, and you think, I could print that. Why is that $7? And how many people did that, kill on its way over? And some, everything that goes into the just-in-time and mass production market models that we, get our goods from.
Well, so you're talking about
Digging
getting
that
away
hole.
from like wasting, and it's like it's not just to benefit the user. You're also like wasting less material and energy, right? Like if I'm only manufacturing the little thing that I need, and I don't have to, it doesn't have to become a huge industry just to get me that little nugget. So it seems like in the big picture, it seems like a good thing that is better for the planet and for the user, right?
Right. I mean, it seems like a net gain. It kind of short circuits the normal way we do things and hurts people who are invested in, that old process. But in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, it's a positive direction. It makes sense, and it's growing. It had a lot of momentum, a couple years, and things have kind of plateaued and just like now steadily making strides. And it's really about these maker spaces, which is another part of the whole movement that brought us 3D printing. They're going to evolve eventually into hybrid makerspace where you go and use equipment or learn stuff that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. But also kind of community centers, recycling hubs, like, every Sunday you, instead of putting stuff out on the front and, a truck comes and does who knows what with it, you bring some clean plastic down to the local makerspace or whatever it's called. And who knows how you selected the content that you wanted to actually get printed down in your local area, but that's a whole part of the other discussion. But you've got your weighed plastic and you get credits against finished objects, and it's all from the local, environment. And there's a lot of strides being made in getting the, ABS and other types of petroleum-based plastics that are just out there, in not only landfills, but just like scattered in the woods, like bezels of refrigerators and old computers and all this other stuff that can be very easily reclaimed. The hardest part is usually the sorting and cleaning and categorizing of plastics, because it's usually all, mushed together, but there's a bunch of people working on that exact problem. And that all streams into, this additive manufacturing, or basically distributed manufacturing model. And it also encourages like learning and not self-reliance, but at least, investing a little bit more time and energy into the products that you do consume. It's not just a thing that you rip the package open. It was the process is a little bit more intimate and custom, and it's one of the benefits of the technology in the first place.
Yeah, and it also seems like again, we're talking about this just kind of like similar to privacy, but I don't know. It seems like we're returning to community-based creation of items and a more kind of direct kind of exchange of items, or purchasing of things from people that and people who've been making these things, as opposed to the stuff coming from China and stuff. So it's interesting how technology is almost returning to the roots of how we evolved to interact with each other in the first place, which is this smaller community-based interactions, as opposed to this kind of global industrialized world or whatever.
Terrence McKenna would categorize that as the archaic revival. I'm a big fan of that term. It's pretty much right in line with that.
So Sarah brought up that people are already printing 3D clothes, and there are 3D printed vehicles and weapons, which
What's 3D
I'm sure
clothes?
AtomJaay can tell us more about.
There's a bunch of approaches to it. A lot of it's very chain link kind of interwoven prints, and they're pretty cool.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Regarding 3D printing, it's kind of like, okay, as long as you don't step on somebody's copyright, to make copies of something that's already out there. You know, but the thing that can be quite incredible about it is you can make parts for things that are no longer made. Like, let's say an old toy, broken gear. As long as you got the know-how to make it in 3D on a CAD program, you can make that gear and bring that toy back to life.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I did some work for a guy who was really into like 67 Broncos, and he was part of communities that restore 67 era, Broncos and just, hardcore people. And the chrome trim, that runs down the body of the truck, those are held on by these ABS trim clips in a certain shape, and when you fasten them, they kind of bow out a little bit and push against. And this guy couldn't find, anything to replace these things, and everybody on the forums was looking for him. So he asked me, he gave me one, old white ABS one to measure against and reproduce. And now by the number of batches that I made, there's probably like, 30 or 40 more Broncos out there that are just sparkling with that chrome trim down the side of it. That's like part of the whole, sometimes it gets lumped in with the, hipsterish, but like, antiques, man, like there's stuff out there that already exists. And if we had a cultural shift, and again, we were talking about this and like yesterday when we were meeting up, but like, would it take a dystopic situation post-cataclysm, would we have to be forced in order to adopt all these, forward-thinking, this would be better for everybody, make it cool on a cultural level kind of mindset, or could we do it through like pop culture and movies and, that kind of thing?
I feel like it would naturally move that direction eventually, like the catalyst of like, a collapse or something or whatever that might accelerate it. But like, okay, what you just mentioned, I mean, like, so it takes one person to make that special piece to help, anyone else who wants to Google that car. And like the community can keep that information alive. So it's like the next person who has the exact same problem, potentially you could put that little piece on some kind of website for free or whatever, or sell it. And then people can get it. Oh, wait.
Well, that brings up the copyright, though.
Yeah, can you sell it?
If you sell it once, you have to assume from a business standpoint that is now in the wild. It's on all the file sharing, whether it's Deep Dark or Pirate Bay or DefCAD or, the lighter, fluffier Thingiverse, and you imagine all these repositories. It's a sticky wicket when it comes to some of my future ambitions of what VR and 3D printing could do together. And then it leads us right into like we might have to just say hell no, DRM, and hope that we get to a patronage centric kind of catalyst for innovation, and something where the person who put the time in and made this awesome idea is rewarded sufficiently without putting locks on the actual property. Like it needs to get out there so everybody can take advantage of it and benefit from it. But the person who did the work, like I've seen it a lot of times, like people, we all drink the Kool-Aid a little bit and put a lot of stuff out there. And then it gets, scooped up and sold and repackaged in, different venues or on eBay or something like that. And, it's just like, you expect something to happen, and you feel this momentum of a community and everything, and you're on your own little bubble, internet bubble and community bubble. And then, the real world slaps you in the face when it comes to this whole digital assets kind of thing. And the only solution is cultural.
Although this will happen in the future, so it's interesting that, perhaps automation and other things will have forced us to change the paradigm through which people are compensated, and that the idea that when you make something and it's stolen or whatever and you're not making money off of it, perhaps we'll already have solutions built in to that. But, who knows? And we'll see. This might grow faster as well than automation and things like that because we're already using 3D printing and stuff.
I mean, right now, Microsoft and other companies have a working group when it comes to the file format for 3D printing. Right now, it's .stl or OBJ, but everybody agrees that STL is kind of inferior, and it just kind of lucked into being the standard. But a lot of digital rights management talk is going on in just the refactoring of what the standard format for 3D printing files will be. So it's a very kind of sticky time right now. I like to see them, stay without all that kind of stuff, because any technology that we come up with as far as additive manufacturing, even subtractive, our digital assets are like beautiful eternal things that we accidentally made. We didn't realize that they're so everlasting, because any technology we come up with is going to be able to take that digital file and get it into its workflow. So it's like anything you put into designing for 3D printing now is not wasted effort that's going to be phased out with the technology, because the way I see it is digital assets they're all created equal, and they're all going to be carried forward with whatever. You get down to the molecular level, or smart spaghetti that works as like proteins, where you just zap the information, they fold from one side. Like the digital file of what you've got, your robot or my robot is going to make it into that workflow.
Thinking about that too, like with microbiological 3D printing, and whether you can have, instead of having to get medicine and have to pay a lot for it, you can just print your own, or those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But
there was open source projects
like that,
going
right?
back four years ago.
The small producers of small run drugs. I can't remember what they're called.
Well, that was a fascinating crossover between 3D printing and the automated Arduino-powered bot.
Pharmacies creating small batches of drugs, like a small pharmacy can custom packing, I think.
The guy who came up with that, with just the idea of, okay, I've got all these, reagents in the back, and I can mix them in this vessel and apply heat if it needs, and all the profiles for all the titration and everything else is all in the bot, so you can just hit a button and boom. But what this guy found out is that certain reactions for certain drugs would be affected by the shape and the surface of the reaction vessel. So this guy was printing his own reaction vessels as well, and in the classic conical, terminates like a cone, like you'd see in a normal lab, so it would fit in other stuff as a standardized kind of thing. And anybody else would be doing this work in a standard lab would be using that exact same shape reaction vessel. And I forget how he got it into his head, but he might have had a bad print that was might have kind of ripply surface or something, and the reaction was either more efficient or something like that. But he started playing around with different shape surface, like steps and grooves and all kinds of different things, and he found optimal reaction vessel shapes for each drug. So like FDM printing and the whole mechanism of a printer doing something else kind of came together there in a really, really cool way. And that, I haven't heard much about it. Who knows what happened to the project, but that's definitely something that if they'd allow it, that's definitely a governance thing. You think people were scared about the possibility of plastic pop guns coming off of 3D printers, look out with, a drug lab in your basement. No. Oh.
Ooh, I'm excited about that.
The other point I wanted to bring up is also some people, creative people, will be able to see things that there's a need for, but it doesn't exist yet. Perfect example, one fella, he sells this product on eBay. I purchased it, and I am so impressed with it, and it's 3D printed. He saw a need for the Oculus Rift for people that buy the VR Lens Labs, the prescription inserts. Well, their frames that go inside the Vive are pathetic. They don't stay put. They're always out of alignment and whatnot. This guy made a 3D printed frame, and you pop the lenses out of the VR frames, and you pop them into these frames. But the only thing is they're not adjustable. So when you order them, you have to give your IPD, and he makes them to that IPD, and they fit in the Vive in the Rift fantastic. So this guy saw this need, because a lot of people were bitching about the VR Lens Lab frames, that they wouldn't stay put properly, they're badly designed and all that. He saw a need, he made it, and he sells it, and it's a fantastic product. I believe it's $25 US.
Now,
That's
let's assume that that guy is selling, and there's enough need for that that guy's selling enough that he could quit a menial job. Let's just pretend for a second, for conversation's sake. So to even do what he does with the custom sizing thing would not be feasible in the old model of how you'd want to start a business. You got an idea, and even the batches that he'd have to get regular injection molded and from China, and all the investment, he probably wouldn't even be able to think about starting a venture like that. And with this little factory in his garage, now he's not only doing something self-reliant, and again, printing your way out of the rat race is a good bumper sticker, but he's also helping people. He's doing something that he probably feels is helping people, and and if he were doing it in recycled plastic, I'd be like 5 stars across the board. So right now, 4.5 stars.
So impressed. I put him in the my rift downstairs, and they haven't budged. They've been rock solid since.
See, if we could just get that guy a stable income from the sharing of his files, and when you needed them, you contacted somebody who was as close to you as possible, and they printed them for you local to you, and everybody made out in that situation. That's the ideal situation. Nobody knows how to do that just yet, but that's the ideal.
You're basically talking about, instead of having the money up front, like instead of having to pay for the file is basically free, and then you appreciate it so much that you go like, oh, I should send that guy money. Like it's almost it's patronage. Yeah. It's a donation. It's after the fact.
Purely cultural incentive, it feels.
I feel like we're getting that's where I want to go, and that's where certain things like the way YouTube is changing and Patreon is picking up, and like these little changes where I kind of hope that's possible. But similarly to the other earlier, like it's hard for me to imagine that big of a cultural change. Like I want it, but that seems like such a mindset change that everyone has to adjust to. Like it's going to be wild if that happens.
I think it's not what I was originally going to talk about, but basically you could put like all the VR printers on a network where like someone like factories in different towns, like they'll have what materials they can make things out of, and then you could just request you could buy it from the buyer, but then it would print off, and your local area, the nearest area to you that has the material and the printer size for it, basically. And then they would get like a cut of that for and whatever shipping cost.
That's even applicable to Nike. Like even if they were to hold on a little bit to something proprietary because it makes them feel good. You could have, our town just got a roll of Nike filament or stock material or something. You know what I mean? Like I can get those dope kicks that I wanted.
Like we're talking about sort of where it will hopefully end up. How close are we to that, right? Because there are like some of these maker spaces around me. Like how much do I have to know? Like, can a regular person figure this stuff out, or is this still kind of a little bit too complicated? Like, you need to.
In social VR, we see 2 types of people kind of bubble up. You've got the makers and the not makers. They want to, have, what the makers have. They want to take advantage of all these cool technologies and stuff. But for whatever reason, can't, won't, shouldn't, all those kind of reasons. They're not makers. So the people who self-identify as makers on a local level are starting to, but hopefully more so as it gets cooler, is endeavoring to not only make cool stuff for themselves, but satisfy the material needs of their local, community with their skills and their decentralized manufacturing toys that they're so into. And again, it's purely cultural and how you use the tools. It doesn't matter what the technology is. It's how it's used and by not only the individuals but the society as a whole. So in this way, this distributed manufacturing network, like all great things that work, is much like a mycelial mat. Or the neurons, the way things map out. It's just a wise distribution of resources and energy.
What like the research they're doing on 3D printed organs.
Oh,
that's a good one.
Well, there's a couple different ways they go about doing it. There's like HP inkjet printers that can do little enzyme solutions and little dot matrices and stuff. And then there's also a method of some forms of 3D printing plastic, as I believe some special form of PLA is biocompatible. So they print a scaffolding of like an ear from a burn victim that they, took a scan of their other ear, mirrored it, and printed a scaffolding that then they grow skin tissue on. So that's applied to some organ work.
But that exists.
Abiomed did the first artificial heart. And I think there's been experiments to incorporate 3D printed pieces in that, but I don't know if that's, on the shelves or anything.
Yeah, I feel like I saw headlines, but I don't remember if it's actually, do people have 3D printed stuff in them right now? Like organs or little pieces?
The biggest thing are stents.
I would imagine bones and hips, titanium.
Stents, heart stents.
The bones aren't strong enough yet. I think they haven't done like those. I mean, they might have done some like hip joint, but I think
I've seen iMaterialize is a company that is like Shapeways, where you could actually contact them and get stuff printed in all kinds of cool exotic materials like titanium and metals like that. And those have medical applications. And I've seen examples of like hip joints and other medical stuff that is starting to be used. Basically holding two halves of her brain and like discussing how the tumor is going to be, that kind of thing. One guy had a popular podcast for a while, and he helped his wife, get rid of a brain tumor by doing that and sending it to all these different specialists because he kept getting turned down. And basically send him a 3D printed model of the brain with the tumor and be like, hey, figure this out. If you got anything, give me a call.
That's getting into
worked out for him.
The telepathy idea, right? But we'll come back to that. Like the idea of communicating information like so much better than we used to be able to. And like the customizability of that sort of, it continuously blows my mind. Like Catapult's talking about like, well, it's set up for his eyes. Like it's printed out exactly for him. And per patient for surgery, like they can print out specific tools, like that. That's a really, I don't know. That seems like a huge change.
My company has the hardware lab has 3 3D printers. We've got a Stratasys. It's about 2 years old. Then we've got a MakerBot. I don't know which model of MakerBot. And then we've got the Flash Forge. And but I mean, then I've got a Solidoodle press, the printer that put Solidoodle out of business. But it's really interesting to be able to go, hey, I have an idea. Let's make a drawing of it, stick it on, wait whatever amount of time, and the Stratasys is really freaking fast. It's amazing. It heats up quickly, it prints quickly, even with the support structure being a separate material, it's faster than my press ever could be.
The satisfaction that you have from coming up with something, just offhand, I have a cool idea in the afternoon, and by the evening you're holding it in your hand, externalizing the imagination in that fashion. In my opinion, it pops off the same chemistry and endorphins as in social VR. You have a thought or something and you use a different tool set. You use Unity, and instead of, plastic molecules, your creation is suspended in light. Instead of holding it, or both holding it, but also walking through it, it's so similar. It's one of the things that fuse the two, is the core reason why is it so awesome. It's because you're externalizing your imagination and sharing it with people, and it's a pure form of communication, and it just feels so freaking good.
Will we ever see scientists ever unlocking more mysteries of the human body or whatever just by 3D printing? Like, for example, maybe figuring out why certain diseases happen or how certain systems work that we didn't understand before?
But I like to make the distinction when talking about 3D printing. You've got personal 3D printing, which falls into the distributed manufacturing networks and stuff like that. Then you've got industrial 3D printing, and that takes on all shapes and forms, and that could even go down into what we're doing with nanotechnology. We're essentially taking an atom and 3D printing with it, just arranging them, and in that sense, probably, maybe, sure. I think we will benefit more from other avenues to find out about how the body works on like a cellular level, and then that, because you can observe this trend with high technology roboticists and a lot of different things, is looking to nature, looking to natural systems that already exist for answers and inspiration, commonplace. If we look at like mitochondrial DNA, how the proteins are stamped out and know, because of mechanical forces, yet to be unlocked by science, they know how to bend and fold and fold and fold and fold and fold and fold into things. So I think as we learn more about how our biology works, we're going to get more, finesse of how we do additive manufacturing. But the files and the pipelines and everything else will be the same. It's just how we actually manipulate the matter will get more and more sophisticated based on how much we learn about our natural systems.
Also, there's a lot of 3D modeling that happens of systems. So like the FDA and places and CDC will model how a vaccine is going to affect the body by creating 3D models and seeing how they're interacting and running simulations of those things. So it's kind of similar, but they're not actually printing the things, they're really doing it within a computer system.
Well, this is an instance where VR and 3D printing, as far as dealing with digital virtual 3D objects, are very similar. So we saw this with architecture. About 2012 was when VR was starting to get talked about, and 3D printing was just starting to kick off. And architects were adopting new technologies to disrupt the industry. And I'd see them at makerspace meetups and 3D printing events and stuff and talk to people. And they were super excited about how 3D printing and how fast it could be and blah, 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 could, revolutionize the iteration process and all this other stuff. And then VR rolled around, and VR disrupted a in-progress disruption of an industry, because it became apparent that some things you don't need to hold in your hand. Some things you can have suspended in light, and it's just as good. Some things you do need to hold in your hand because you need to interact with meat space in some way in order to make sure it works right. But they go hand in hand. And when we saw the disruption of architecture kind of take place, it was the people who thought, oh, I'm going to get this really expensive 3D printer, and then they weren't getting any work because everything shifted over to like kind of what Reverend Kyle is doing now, and Home Depot and Lowe's are adopting the same thing. It's iteration is very easy in VR. So pertaining to the medical thing, most 3D things that 3D technology could help medicine, you don't necessarily have to hold the model in your hand. It doesn't have to be made out of matter. It's just as good to be able to interact with it on light as the medium.
I feel like let's move into VR, because you sort of touched on it there. Like, so these are two technologies that are like, we're seeing them, we're seeing them take over, like they're moving in a direction. How are they going to interact? Like, you had some ideas I had never considered. Like my go-to was like printing Psych out, or printing like a trophy, like I beat a game and I get a trophy and then I print it, and now I have like a real representation of completing that game or something. But like you went a little bit deeper than that even.
At the base, the core of that experience, it's like I like to refer to it as a talisman. Something that you obtained or achieved or encountered in a virtual space, usually social, because that's where the most emotional impact seems to take place, is when you're experiencing it with other people. drives the immersion and the emotional connection as far as memories go. So any aspect of that printed out in real life, essentially using 3D printing as an export function, as opposed to an import function, which would be 3D scanning and whatnot, which is of the same topic, but a whole different conversation. Using it as an export function, you can export these talisman that, whenever you see it in meat space, you're for a moment, transported back to, the VR experience and whatever that meant to you. And it blurs the lines between the two, on a personal kind of ego observing the universe level and, on like a cultural level, because if you're talking about and referring to and interacting with items and your friends, on a cultural level in meat space that are from the VR space, wherever that may be, it's making where we are more real right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I wish there was. I was looking for someone that had jewelry or something as that I could use that as an example, but no one's really. Maybe if I got a pair of like Zircron wings printed out or something.
Like you could have every time you have a cool, guest host that maybe has a custom avatar, you can grab a piece of it, ask for a piece of it, and create a little curios cabinet for yourself, a little trophy cabinet. That's what I do. I've got a bunch of avatars and worlds and knickknacks and items from the different experiences I've had. I've got them 3D printed out, and they sit on my desk, and I've got a display case for some of the nicer ones, and I look at them, and it's very Mr. Rogers-ish, which we all grew up with.
It'll be great.
We're a little bit past an hour, so like we should start closing up. But any final thoughts or anything?
Let's hit on the point of so we talked about something that was emotionally important or valuable to you, being able to export it, which that could be a number of superficial or trivial things, and that's one of the criticisms that personal 3D printing had for a long time for a bunch of different reasons, that it was the great American tchotchke maker, and with this whole idea of fusing VR, especially social VR, with 3D printing and blurring the lines between the hard R and VR, is this idea of being able to encounter content that you then plumb into your local distributed manufacturing network through just your normal VR interaction. I'm going to use a horror game as an example. Imagine you're in a rickety old house and you're in the decrepit bathroom. You're waiting for the zombie or the monster to like walk by, and you're peeking through the crack in the door, and you're in the market for a toothbrush holder. You were going to buy a toothbrush holder. You're going to go down to Bed Bath & Beyond. You're going to get in your car, go down there just for a toothbrush holder. You didn't even know, which one you were going to get. But, your wife or your significant other has been harping on you that, you're using the nice, glass from the kitchen as your toothbrush holder. It should be in the cabinet. It's getting bad. So you notice that in this bathroom, the toothbrush holder, the zombie, forget about the zombie for a second. The toothbrush holder is really nice. That might be the one that, you would have gotten. So while you're avoiding the zombie, you just reach over and you click on it, you put in your inventory, you drag it into your print queue or something. And then, either online or offline, you go through the, material color selection, and you have it printed very, very, very close to you by somebody in your community. And you just did some shopping, and you did it in a way that, kind of.
So you're saying
and saves the planet.
I can save my marriage while I'm killing zombies, basically?
That's the selling point.
That's the promise. Do you think that we can actually abandon the idea, like right now, that you're paying for goods ahead of time, to this idea where goods are just freely available? Like we're going to be able to print stuff, and then you're going to
half because your neighbor or your local makerspace / recycling center / community center / manufacturing hub, they still need some intake of resources for the resources that are being expended to make you your thing. So at the site, meat and potatoes, there's still a transaction, but the people engaged in that transaction should be freely available to bring in boundless digital data at will, so it's a little bit of both, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Okay, so maybe it's not as simple as like I'm pitching it. That's fine. This is hard stuff to fit in my brain. It's so outside.
It's also the whole like how much responsibility you want to take for making your own things, because you can pay the place down the street and they'll make it for you out of recycled material, and it's quick, it's custom, it's local to you, and all those great things. But if you had a printer and you put a little time into learning how to use it, that same item is pennies compared to having somebody else involved.
So after we all print out like our teledildonics or whatever, like that's obviously priority 1. And then what's priority 2? Like
that's being done. That was priority negative 2. That was done before
it was possible. Like that was on the list.
Yeah.
I think it has the potential to happen, but that doesn't mean that the government's going to keep a close eye on it. Like, I think it's going to be as free as we want it to be, but I think in a limited scale it's going to happen. But I don't think it's going to happen full scale because the government's not going to really allow that.
I like that.
Well, it definitely threatens the the status quo of how things operate. It short circuits a bunch of things. So,
yeah, you've made quite a few comments of recycling, and I dig that a lot. There's a place local to where I'm at called Scrap Exchange, and it's a local. Essentially, it's upcycling. You can go there and donate all kinds of stuff. They'll separate it, throw little price tags on it, and people will come there and purchase it to work on projects, or maybe there's some golf clubs and they'll just purchase the golf clubs. But one of the things that they have at the very front of the store when you go in are these barrels. They're like 25-gallon barrels full of weird stuff, like keyboard keys or deodorant, like the stick deodorant dispensers, but without the deodorant in them. They've never been filled. Just strange, odd stuff like that. And you can fill up a bag with, however much you can stuff in that bag for $5 or $10, and then you've got art project crap for kids to make stuff with, and it's really interesting. Cool. I've donated DB9 adapters by like the bushel to that place, just because it's like someone can do something with these purple DB9 adapters. I got no use for them.
Could be ABS, ABS, and all kinds of
it is ABS plastic bodies on those.
So that could, gets chopped up. That can go into a machine that makes filament that goes into 3D printers, and there's a vast resource. I see urban foraging, that kind of term where people go around, looking for edible plants and stuff in urban environments. I see that branching off into plastics and other materials. If they had a little reagent kit and some solvents and stuff, and they come across some, plastic out in the woods, people hiking, people, I don't know if you've ever been geocaching, but in that particular subculture, there's a term, cash in, trash out. So whenever you go hiking through the woods for whatever reason, you get a trash bag with you and you see stuff and you clean up as you're experiencing the outdoors. So you have a little reagent kit and your little test kit, and there's lots of ABS out there. You can tell which is which, and it doesn't have to be cleaned that much. And the beauty about FDM or FFF, fused filament fabrication, the plastic and the nozzle and the filament going into the nozzle and all that, is it's beautifully low tolerance compared to resins and SLS and the powders and all this other stuff, the binders and everything else. By low tolerance, I mean you can put a lot of messy stuff in and still get an acceptable product out of it. I shudder to use the comparison again, but it's just so darn apt. But FFF, these plastic printers are very much like the AK-47 of the printer world. You can throw them in the ground, and get mud in them, and pick them up, and they're still working. They're that kind of reliable as far as a stock material coming in standpoint. And there's a lot we can do with that if what you're after with the qualities of 3D printing that's most important to you are this recycling and distributed manufacturing and all that. I know there's a place for resin printers, detail, and all these other things, but what really gets me excited is the almost elegant primitiveness of the fused filament fabrication machines. I put a lot of dirty stuff in, recycled plastic, and got some good stuff out. This guy in Chicago that prints exclusively from auto parts plastic, like an old dashboard, and he just grinds it up, extrudes black plastic, and prints what he needs out of that extruded black plastic.
This all sounds incredibly optimistic.
Yes.
Which is great. So this is for you, Popo, and all you fucks out there who think we're too pessimistic. Look, we're taking the optimistic view.
Yeah.
Things might turn out. We might be okay. And not only okay, but like
right.
it might be fucking amazing. Like like this sounds like a really cool world we might be stepping into.
It was. Popo's not here to rein him in.
Are you low key dissing Popo and all the others?
No, I love everyone. Everyone's cool. Everyone's welcome into this amazing future we're going to. Let's do it. Let's do a photo. Let's do something different. We always get up on the stage. Why don't we go sit on the couches or something?
Get on this
You're the
side.
tiniest person.
Yeah, exactly. Those are.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
As I look about me, I see it's a revolution that you